Uh, we had said that in our talks about the aerial toll houses we would go back to Egypt with Ammonius Saccas. I want to explain that a little because the reason we're going back to Egypt now is because we want to take up some of the interconnected developments that were taking place before we go back to Mani and the Manichaeans. And I want to show you how this kind of network is formed between the East, all the way to India, and Egypt, and how the Manichaeans helped form that network. Because Manichaeans, of course, were in Egypt, in the desert, and maybe even before the Christian monks went there. The Manichaeans, of course, considered themselves to be a type of Christian. But the school at Apamea in Syria, which was founded by one of the generals, the Seleucid generals of Alexander the Great. I think it was named for his wife, in fact. It was a very important city, a treasure city. And it also was a center of various philosophies. When we talk about Ammonius Saccas, we remember that his father was a student, had been a student, perhaps Ammonius was as well, I'm not sure, of Posidonius or Posidonius of Apamea. Now, Ammonius Saccas is often given the designation of being the founder of Neoplatonism. I would like to suggest that he synthesized something that was already going on, because Numenius of Apamea, who may have been really the founder of the school there, Numenius of Apamea had tried to synthesize Platonism with Zoroastrianism and the Egyptian system and the Chaldean systems. Now, whether he actually included much from India or not is not certain, but Zoroaster comes to us before the beginning of the Great Axial Period, when the Indo-Aryan culture and society were still sort of unified before the Aryans moved into India and really reshaped the native religions into more or less classical Hinduism. So a lot of the ideas were very similar. So the school of Apamea was really syncretistic, but it was an effort to enrich Platonism with these other systems from the East. And Posidonius or Posidonius of Apamea, who later moved to Cyprus, was a great Stoic philosopher, also a brilliant scientist. He was a physicist, a mathematician, and an astronomer, and a Stoic philosopher, not immune to the syncretism of Apamea. Now, through this school, the Saccases had come to Alexandria and founded the school in Alexandria, which really bears the name of Ammonius Saccas. Now, Ammonius Saccas was the teacher of both Plotinus, who was the teacher of Augustine of Hippo, and of Origen. This is why one finds some similarities between Origenism and Augustinianism. And this syncretism that came down to Alexandria would have an influence on the development of philosophical and religious thought in Egypt. So this is why I let Ammonius Saccas bring us back down to Egypt from the Middle East, from the Chaldean region, because we want to see how these influences came in from several spheres, into Egypt, into Syria, into Palestine, into the Palestinian desert, the desert of Gaza, the Egyptian desert, and why we get some sort of sometimes syncretistic notions in our ascetic theology as opposed to the theological theology of the church, that is, the doctrinal theology of the church, and why we have to be very careful about trying to form dogmas and firm doctrines from ascetic literature rather than taking the wisdom of the Desert Fathers as the wisdom of the Desert Fathers, and not trying to form a theological corpus from the ascetic writings themselves. Because in many cases they will oppose the theology of the Church itself, that is, what was given to us by the Holy Fathers. There's a reason why the Holy Fathers, starting with Justin and going right up to Gregory Palamas and beyond, insisted on condemning the idea of any kind of real dichotomy between soul and body in our personhood itself. The idea that somehow the body is an inferior thing, or just a shell that houses a ghost of some kind that will depart and escape and be set free from the body. All these ideas, Platonistic ideas, are common to all of these syncretistic systems that developed. And in monasticism, it's natural that because we feel the passions physically, we want to surmise that perhaps the passions are within the flesh and the body itself, when this, of course, simply isn't true. If we struggled only against the body without struggling also with the development of our soul and with our minds, then we would have no way to take account of the passions and deal with them and conquer them or overcome them. Because the flesh does not think or reason. It doesn't tempt us or feel temptation. The flesh responds to the mind. And the mind, of course, is in the soul. And this is why St. Justin, for example, says, if you have a team of oxen and you unloose one of the team, the other oxen cannot pull alone. It can't do anything. Because he says the body only fulfills what the mind, what the nous, tells it to. So, but these ideas that were coming in, these syncretistic ideas, all divide body and soul and set them in opposition to one another. And they set up a dissonance in God's creation itself that simply does not exist. A dissonance between soul and body which splits or forms a schism within our personhood itself, our being itself. And the Holy Fathers tell us that this is false. It's not true. When Apostle Paul refers to the flesh, of course he's talking about the power of sin, which is dwells parasitically within us, simply because we fulfill through the flesh what our mind conceives. And the body alone cannot conceive anything. So when we see this syncretist school from Apamea coming back into Egypt, and at the same time we see the influence of the Gnostic forms of monasticism and the Gnostic ideas about asceticism, which form a schism between soul and body, we realize that these things had powerful influences, that both Origen and the Origenists, the followers of Origen, really fell prey to these ideas. And this is what led them astray, and finally led Origen into teachings very akin to Hinduism, although Pythagoras had similar teachings. The idea of transmigration of the souls, the pre-existence of souls, and all of these other ideas. And so this was a melting pot now. It became a place where all kinds of ideas, ascetic notions, Stoicism, and Eastern, as far as Hinduism and Buddhism, all were brought together, and they spread through this entire region. Nothing existed in isolation in these places. And the ancient world was very vibrant, and things and ideas moved between centers, and ideas were exchanged, concepts were exchanged. So it became to the councils of the Church and the Holy Fathers to sort through this and give us the sure guide about what was orthodox and what was not, what was Christian, what claimed to be Christian, and to set us straight. The ascetic literature is not a dependable source for this, because it's under all these influences as well.